Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Sex Education Season 3. Let's talk about it. So Sex Education is back on Netflix for its 3rd season, and I am so excited to get down to my thoughts on the 3rd season of this show. One of the very best shows that Netflix has ever birthed on its platform. Truly, this series is just so extraordinary, and I feel like it's been getting better and better and better. I have previously mentioned this series in my video for best TV shows of 2020, I believe it was, where I mentioned the previous season, so you can go ahead and check out that video if you want to hear my thoughts on the previous season of the show. But I have noticed that in recent years and months that the series has become more popular, and that's really exciting to me because like I've been knew that this is excellent. Like I already knew. Okay, it's nice of you guys to catch up, but catch up you did, and now we have to discuss the latest season that dropped on Netflix. But before we dive into my thoughts on this latest season, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And if you do enjoy my reviews of Netflix shows, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, it would really help out the channel. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on season 3 of Sex Education. So Sex Education was created by Laurie Nunn, and the episodes are directed by Ben Taylor. And I would say what makes the series so great is its unique perspective on, you know, teenagehood and the lives of young people in the modern day. And it definitely belongs within the kind of teenage dramedy genre that we have seen. I mean, there are just an ocean of TV shows and films dedicated to this point in time in people's lives, but I do feel like none of these other movies or TV shows approach things in the way that Sex Education does. I mean, just going off of the title, there's a central focus there, and that title is so intentional. I mean, not just for shock value, although I'm sure that's part of it, but also of course because the subject matter that is explored in this series specifically revolves around sex, but not just sex, but also relationships in general. And I feel like that is a different angle that the series takes and does so well, that allows it to stand out from the crowd, the ocean of teenage dramedies that we have. Now we're going to be diving into the nitty-gritty of this season and exploring what each of the characters were up to, maybe not in like an equal amount of depth because there are so many characters on this show. But before we go through that, I did just want to look at the show as a whole, and as I mentioned before, thematically speaking, it is really different to what we see in other teenage dramedy shows or movies. But another thing that's really unique about the show is its aesthetic. It has such a cool aesthetic because it's like timeless. You can't quite place where this series takes place. Like, you have an understanding that it takes place somewhere within the English countryside, but the series as a whole, in terms of its, you know, themes and its characters, very much borrows a lot from American television and American cinema, the kind of John Hughes exploration of teenagehood there, but at the same time the characters are undoubtedly British. Like unapologetically British, and like I love that so much. But then you also have the added layer of just this timeless feeling about the series, and it's seen in the costuming, it's seen in the building itself. Like the building looks something quite Georgian, quite grand, and it just makes it harder to place when the show is happening. And there are telltale signs in terms of social media and technology. You know it's taking place in the modern day, as well as the kind of references to pop culture and issues that the show makes. You know it's in the present day, but then the costuming comes in to kind of trick you into thinking that it might be the like early 90s, maybe even the 80s, the 70s, depending on the character. So it's a really interesting mishmash of different periods that are referenced in the aesthetic of the show, and I feel like it adds to that feeling of the show feeling timeless, because even when they do have use of technology, because you have that kind of mishmash of like old technology and new technology, some people have radio show still. And also the TV, you know, when we see the interviews taking place for the students and the school, the actual kind of broadcast of that interview on television looks very retro. So yeah, I like that kind of mishmash that the series has. It just adds to this very unique aesthetic. Now, in terms of the plot that acts as the backdrop to this whole season, if you look back to season 2, we saw the students of Moordale go through this kind of sexual revolution, all helped by Jean, all helped by my girl Jean, okay, who's wonderfully portrayed by Gillian Anderson, but we'll talk about her in a second. But because they were able to get advice from her, of course they were also initially getting advice from Otis about their sex lives and about their relationships, there was this kind of sexual liberation amongst the students of Moordale. But unfortunately, that doesn't sound all too good to the parents of prospective students, that doesn't sound all too good to the local media, it doesn't sound great to the investors of the school. And so even though the students feel better about their sex lives and about their intimate relationships, unfortunately it hasn't been reflecting well on the school as a whole, because it's been labelled as the sex school in a very derogative way, and the media just can't get enough of making out these students to be these like horrible, vulgar, kind of putting all of these negative associations with exploring the themes of sex and relationships and teenagehood onto these students. Of course, this is an issue for these sixth form students, because if they're coming from a sixth form that has a negative reputation, then a lot of these universities are going to look down upon them, even though they should only be judging them based off of their grades and what they have individually accomplished. It's just not a good look, because the universities are going to think that they were a part of this movement, and even though it's nothing to be ashamed of, we know what society is like please, we know society. So it is a very complex issue at play here. Even though it is played for laughs a lot of the time, there are layers to it. And even though at the very end I was really happy for the students when they were able to get the new head teacher fired, we'll talk about her as well, okay, she's a menace, whatever. When they were able to get her fired, I was rooting for them. I was like, yes, yes. But at the same time, because the show is so clever, because the show is so layered and complex, they couldn't just have their cake and eat it too, because at the very end the school ends up getting closed. Because those issues of investors and prospective students and the media didn't just disappear with their sexual liberation part 2. Unfortunately, it did rear its ugly head and they had to face the consequences of their actions. But as I mentioned, one way that the school's governors tried to prevent this outcome was by bringing in this new head teacher who referred to herself as Hope, okay, which is very on the nose because she was supposed to be the school's hope to turn around in terms of its reputation and gain more students, gain more notoriety in its community, but she didn't really manage to do that. Instead of listening to the students and cooperating with them, getting an understanding of what their wants and needs were for the school, whilst also bringing her expertise and her experience in order to come about with like this happy medium that could bring the school forward in the right direction, instead of doing that, she decided to bring it under a dictatorship. She decided she read some of Jean's book, okay, she skimmed read it and she was like, nah, that's not what we're gonna do here, okay, threw it out the window and decided to take a page from books from like Catholic schools, okay, from Catholic school, I know, from Catholic schools, books from military schools. She just decided to go all in on an authoritarian regime at that school. She enforced uniforms, she started drawing lines, she just went all in on quickly changing the direction of the school, and it didn't match with the school's identity, it didn't match with the identity of the students, but she forced it upon them, and clearly it was never going to work out. Now that was all fun and games, okay, it was really funny to see how the students reacted to their uniforms. I'm not actually opposed to uniforms. In the UK, many schools, the majority of schools have uniforms, so it wasn't really this big shock horror thing for me personally. I feel like that was more for like foreign audiences to see that and be like, oh no, they have uniforms. But like for us, it was like, yeah, oftentimes sixth forms don't have uniforms, but you know, sometimes they do. So it's like, or at least you have to like wear business attire or something. Like that is a thing in the UK. But anyways, they have their uniforms, they have their lines literally drawn on walls telling them to walk in single file down the hallways. It's just about exerting power over them and lording that power over them, even though at first when you're introduced to the character of Hope, okay, the head teacher, she seems like a cool woman. Like she seems pretty cool and like down with the kids as much as she could be. She has a cool hairstyle. Like you're tricked into thinking that she's going to be cool with the students and like try and work with them, but in reality she ends up being far stricter far stricter than Mr. Groff himself. Although I will say I did get a little bit of a clue. I did get a little bit of a clue because I have those eagle eyes. I couldn't help but notice how she racially profiled Jackson mere seconds after meeting him. she racially, because you have that scene where Jackson and Adam are sitting outside of her office ready to meet her for the first time, and she comes out assuming that Adam is the one who's the head boy who has all of these accomplishments, and then Jackson's just sitting there like, interesting, but that was me, okay. And I was like, oh, okay. And that very much reminded me of Stormfront. She reminded me of Stormfront from The Boys. She reminded me of her, especially with the haircut as well, and the actresses look similar, except Stormfront is a brunette. But yeah, I definitely got those vibes from her with the racial profiling from like day one. But who knew it would get so bad? Who knew like she would literally just ignore people's wants and desires? She would just ignore people's gender identity. Like it got very, very bad. She would assault students. Why is no one talking about this? She deserves to be in handcuffs. She was assaulting students. Anyways, so that was a very interesting backdrop for this school to go through. But of course, we also had the individual stories taking place for all of the characters. Now, there are a ton of characters on Sex Education, all with very interesting stories. Okay, this is one of the rare occasions where such a huge cast is actually done justice, because all of their stories are unique and interesting, and they're actually paid off very well by the end of the season. But we can't focus on all of them, so we're going to be diving into what I think are like the key ones from season 3. So the first character up is Mr. Eric Effiong, the main character of the show. Some of you guys might be confused thinking that it's Otis. Don't worry, like I was also confused in the first season, but then it quickly became clear. It quickly became clear that Eric Effiong is the main character of this show. So we're starting with him first of all because he's an icon, he's a legend, he's a VIP. And speaking of VIP, I did actually do a video of VIP characters in TV shows last year, and like, spoiler alert, he was on that list. You know, unsurprisingly, okay, it just makes sense because he's excellent. But anyways, Eric is back and he is in this new relationship with Adam after Adam professed his like for him. They don't love quite yet, his like for him in the previous season, in this like romantic grand gesture that was just so heartwarming. Okay, like, oh my goodness, they're back and they're in this kind of relationship that they're trying to navigate. Now, it's a tricky situation when it comes to Eric and Adam, because on the one hand I love it, like on the one hand I'm eating it up, I'm like, oh my god, I love them together, like I don't want them to ever break up. I was so upset when they didn't end up together at the very end. But on the other hand, you know, on the side of my brain that's, you know, trying to think critically, trying to evaluate things logically, boring. On that other side of my brain, unfortunately, reluctantly, I have to say, that there were red flags. There were issues with their relationship. As much as we loved them together, like, Adam kind of sucked for a very long time. And even though he sucked because he liked Eric, it doesn't change the fact that he sucked. It doesn't change the fact that he has like general issues that he needs to work on. Now, one of the things that I really enjoy about this series, which we'll talk about at length later on, is its inclusivity and its diversity in terms terms of, you know, who it represents in the show. And I feel like in the case of Adam, he's not the guy that we want him to be. We want him to be happy. We want him to fully interact and open up with Eric. Like we want him to get there, but it's realistic that he's not there. Like it's realistic that he's not ready to fully just be out there as a young man in this stage of this relationship. Like it makes sense, but as much as, you know, we want him to be on Eric's level, Eric who is like just so much more fully comfortable in himself, and he understands what he wants and how he wants to present himself to the world, and we want to see Adam just right there with him, but it makes sense that he's not. I mean, he's still hung up on how people view him. He's still pressured to uphold these kind of archaic views on manhood and what it means to be a man, being strong, holding back emotions. And so it makes sense that there's a conflict there already when it comes to their relationship, and they do go through these fights throughout it, and again, it breaks my heart each and every time. But like I said, the series is cleverly written. It doesn't hold back when it comes to these difficult discussions, and so they are presented as a really lovely, cute but problematic couple. Now in the case of Eric himself, like I said, he has always been more comfortable in his own skin. He knows who he is, but in this season we actually get to see him go into another environment, and crucially an environment that isn't quite as accepting of people like him, people in the LGBTQ community. He goes back home to Nigeria, and one of the first things that we hear in regards to his return to his home country is, be careful, we need you to pull it back, like we don't want grandma to get upset. He's already got these warnings from his mum about how he should present himself whilst he's back home with his family. And then we see why. We see why when they go to Nigeria. They return to Lagos for a wedding, and we just see Eric be bombarded with all of these heteronormative values just all day, every day, left, right and center. And they're there for a wedding for this heterosexual couple, but still it's the fact that the second that he's there, he's already being asked whether he has a girlfriend. Like there is no room for assumption of anything else, basically. Like there was no question in his grandma's mind, and I'm saying this as like someone who comes from Congo. I'm not Nigerian, okay, but I come from the DRC, and like there's no way that his grandma would think like, oh, maybe he's into what? What? Please, like I can't, it cannot be overstated how brilliantly this series handled that storyline. The fact that Eric went back to Nigeria, interacted with his family members, his well-meaning family members that truly love him, that want the best for him, but would not even entertain the idea that he would be gay. Like no literally no. I feel like the series just excellent. I have to tip my hat off to them because it was so accurate. It really was, because it conveyed the complexity of the situation. It's not like his family hate him. They love him, but they cannot fathom that being a life that he could live. And that's something that he has to come to terms with, and it's something that he struggles with because, again, he is so open with his sexuality and so comfortable in his own skin when he's back home in the UK, but that's not something that he's allowed to do in Nigeria. And he's told that time and time again, and it just makes him feel small. It makes him feel like he can't be his authentic self around his family. But then of course you get that scene where he's at the wedding, and you know, he's been side-eyeing the photographer for this wedding for a little bit, but it's only at the wedding that the photographer finally approaches him and tells him, like, listen, I know, okay, he gives him a look like, we're on the same page here, why don't you come with me and I'll take you somewhere where we can be together with our people, we can hang out with our people, right? And it's never explicitly said because, again, it's just so underground. It's something that you don't even want to be caught saying, thinking, considering, because it really is that serious in a lot of cases in Africa. But when they do finally hang out, first of all, you have that scene in the taxi where the guy is just so tense, and at first I was like, oh, is this like a bad exchange? Like, are they going to do something to Eric? And I think Eric also felt that way, like he was at risk, because when he got off the taxi, he was like, whoa, whoa, like he was backing out. But I think in reality what happened is that guy understood that they couldn't sit too close together, they couldn't be too chatty together, because the taxi driver would start suspecting things and it would be a really dangerous situation for them. And it's only after they left the taxi and they arrived at this place, and again, like, Eric was quite nervous, because to be fair, like, he's a stranger. To be fair, he's a stranger, okay, but then they get to the venue and they're surrounded by people who are just so free thinking. They just look so free. They look like the polar opposite to the traditional family that we saw during the wedding, and it's just like a completely different vibe. It feels like Eric has found his people, just as that guy said. And then he ends up kissing the guy, and it's like but again, I understand, because he feels like he is free, but not just free in the way that he is in England. He's free amongst his own people. It's just a different level of freedom that I think the character was feeling at that time that led to him kissing that other guy, even though he's in a relationship with Adam. Okay, so now that we've talked about Eric, let's get into the rest. Let's get into the riffraff. I'm kidding, all of these characters are excellent, but let's start off with Otis. So Otis is in a relationship with Ruby. When we first meet him in season 3, they're kind of having this like casual sex arrangement. It's not really a proper relationship, but then it turns into a relationship once Otis expresses his feelings for Ruby. And it turns out that Ruby kind of has her heart on her sleeve, because she falls in love with Otis for some reason. For some reason. I like the character of Otis, okay, but the fact that Ruby was in love with him after like T-2 seconds, please. But yeah, she did fall in love with him, and she told him that she loved him, and he didn't say anything back. He was like, that's nice. Oh, oh no. And it's of course because he is still in love with Maeve. Like, Maeve is his one at this time, so you know, at the back of his mind, he could never fully commit to Ruby, because he knew that he still loved Maeve. He still had feelings for her. And after the message that he left Maeve, you know, he didn't actually hear back from her because of the whole drama. We'll talk about Maeve in a second, with Isaac deleting the message before Maeve could actually hear it and respond to it. But from Otis's point of view, she rejected him in a big way, and as a result, you know, he's trying to combat the feelings that he has for her, trying to separate himself from her, but at the same time, deep down, he knows, like, he knows, I'm not in love with Ruby because I have this little Maeve-sized hole in my heart. But what I personally found more interesting than the will they won't they relationship between Maeve and Otis is the storyline surrounding his home life, is the storyline surrounding Jean and her pregnancy, and the fact that Otis had to essentially accept Ola and Jakob as part of his family because of this pregnancy, bringing these 4 people together to try and work out their family arrangement, so that Jean could be supported during this difficult time. I really enjoyed that storyline. Like, that to me was just so much more interesting than the Maeve will they won't they. I think Maeve on her own is an interesting character. I think Otis on his own is an interesting character, even though I give him a hard time. I'm just so much more interested in his relationships outside of Maeve. I like his relationship with Eric. Their friendship is just adorable. It's just goals. I love their friendship so much, and I love his relationship with his mother and exploring what it's like to have a mother who's a sex therapist, but at the same time has difficulties with her own personal relationships, and you know, the fact that he confronts her about it but then feels so guilty once the unthinkable happens to her after she's given birth. We'll talk about that in a second. Like, I just loved exploring that way more than the Maeve stuff, even though, you know, I like them together. I think they're cute, like, not saying that, but you know, it's like we've seen it before many times. Like, what I love about the show is the stuff that we haven't seen before. But one way that this series did very much go against the grain in terms of the usual tropes that we see in teenage dramedies is the fact that Ruby did fall in love with Otis instead of the other way around, because usually, like, the uncool guy is obsessed with the cool girl. She is the it girl. She is the it girl of Moordale, and she fell in love with him. She introduced him to her sick father, and they had like this great time. And again, another way that it undercuts tropes as well is that the sick father, whilst he is in a very difficult position, and you know, you can see that he's having mobility issues, he needs help getting places, but the series doesn't portray him in a kind of pathetic, kind of like helpless, victimized way. Like it portrays him as like a complex being, and you know, he's not one of the main characters of the show, but you know, the fact that we get to see his interactions with Ruby, the respect that she still has for him, even though she obviously has to take care of him quite a bit, the fact that he's like smoking weed and talking to Ruby and her new boyfriend, like I feel like, again, it's just these small things that the series does that goes against some of the stuff that we have seen before that really just have perpetuated negative stereotypes about certain groups of people. It's just so refreshing to see the show do something different. And another aspect of Otis's story that I really enjoyed was his kind of journey of self-discovery that he went through, where he realized that he can't quite stop himself from caring about people forever, because after everything that happened with the clinic and everything, the fallout from that, from season 2, he was just so reluctant to step into other people's issues, to try and offer any advice to them or even any support to them. He really just pulled back from that, and you saw that throughout this season. But in the end, he realizes that this is a gift that he has, like this is something that comes naturally to him, and as he says to his mother, he even gets like a rush from it, a rush of connection from talking to people and trying to counsel them. And I feel like that was a really nice, profound journey for the character to go through in terms of discovering that about himself. Okay, so next up, let's talk about yet another star of the show, and that is of course Mama Milburn, Jean. Now, I'm not biased at all because we have the same name or anything, but I just think Jean Milburn is like an icon. She's a legend. She's the moment. Like, what can I say? She's an incredible character. But this season saw her go through some struggle, go from some difficulties, because she is in fact pregnant with Jakob's baby. Or is it? This character has like the worst cliffhanging ending. Last season it was the fact that she was pregnant to begin with, and now this season it may not even be Jakob. I can't. I literally just can't. Like, what am I gonna do if that family splits up? I'm already so invested in the Jakob Jean relationship. Like, what am I actually gonna do if they have to split up because of this? I don't know. This show wrecks me. Anyway, so and before we even found that out, Jean was going through her pregnancy throughout this series and constantly being reminded that it's atypical for a woman of her age to be pregnant to begin with. And you know, you saw her go through the physical strain of the pregnancy and the side effects, the flatulence, if you will, which I think was fun, but also at the very end there, it does become very real, these risks that she was kind of warned about, and we do see her start hemorrhaging after she has given birth prematurely. I think it was 8 weeks premature to her daughter. So that was just such a scary moment, and you see everyone at the hospital there, you see Jakob just kind of worrying over her, and Ola just not being able to process things, because I'm sure it brought up a lot of painful memories about her own mother being sick, and you know, being in hospitals like that would be a very traumatic experience for someone who's gone through that kind of loss. So yeah, again, like this series just, it explores so much in such little time, and all in 8 episodes, and done so well, where all of these characters are experiencing different emotions and reacting to this scenario differently, because whilst this is happening, whilst they are terrified for Jean's life, there's also this joy, this literal bundle of joy that has entered the world in the form of Otis and Ola's younger sister. So it's just such a conflicting moment, and yeah, it was a moment where I was like, they're not gonna kill off my girl. They're not gonna kill off my girl Gillian Anderson, because she was doing the actor. She is like so incredible. I'm starting to think she's like Viola Davis level in terms of like, she's incapable of doing a bad job. I'm starting to think that Gillian Anderson is on that level, because she's like amazing. So I was hoping that they weren't gonna kill her off, okay, because otherwise we would have issues. But still, even though I was really happy that she was alive, you did feel the gravity of what happened, and I do feel like it was a very emotionally impactful successful storyline. And also what was interesting when it comes to Jean's storyline in this season is that they kind of juxtapose it against the experience of Hope, who is undergoing IVF, and she has been unsuccessful up until this point, and that's clearly something that is causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of mental strain on her, while she's also trying to gain control of Moordale School. So you kind of get an insight into her private life and into the struggles that she's going through behind the scenes. I don't think it justifies the way that she abuses students in this season whatsoever. Like, please lock her up. She should have faced way more consequences for the stuff that she was getting up to in this season. But still, I do find it interesting how you have this kind of younger character in Hope who is struggling to conceive, and then you have an elder character in Jean who is pregnant, and you can see the kind of wistfulness, the kind of maybe even jealousy that Hope has as she looks onto Jean and sees that she is able to experience something that Hope herself is trying so hard to have a go of. So next up, we also have the character of Maeve. Now Maeve is also going through a difficult time. Poor Maeve. Like, Maeve is the classic kind of Tracy Beaker character where she's just going through so much at such a young age, and someone who's just so bright and intelligent like her should just be allowed to get through her education, focus on that, and then get ahead in life. But unfortunately, those aren't the cards that she's dealt with, and she has quite a bit of responsibility on her shoulders. But that's kind of aided by Isaac, who is her friend, who is in a wheelchair, and he lives in the caravan site. I think I'm not actually sure what the actual site is, but he lives in a caravan nearby. They hang out together and they have like this special connection with one another, and eventually she starts seeing Isaac in a more romantic light. But unfortunately, that's kind of ruined because it's revealed that Isaac deleted the message that Otis had left her on her phone, and I feel like she should have been more upset about that. I feel like she should have been more upset about that, because the idea that Isaac would try to like assert ownership of her and say like, if I can't have you, no one else can, and he tried to like play it off as like, I was worried about you because Otis treated you so poorly, but it's like, let her make that decision for herself with all of the facts presented to her. Don't try to take that decision out of her hands and then try to play knight in shining armor when she discovers what you did, or when you tell her what you did and try to twist it into like a favor that you did for her. No, Isaac, please. Isaac, no. Listen, I'm glad that this series, once again, we have inclusivity, we have diversity, we have a character who is not, you know, mobily typical. He does have disabilities, but at the same time, he's still like a complex character. You know, you don't feel sorry for him, you feel angry towards him, you understand him on some level. It is a very complex situation, and I appreciate that about the representation of this character. Now, speaking of representation, let's talk about Jackson, Cal, and Val. Now, this is a very interesting trio of black characters in this series, and like, I'm smiling so much because this series didn't just give us a token black. This series didn't just give us a token Negro. Like, it would have been okay to have Eric Effiong be like the black character of the show because he's such an excellent character. Please, let's be real. But no, this series decided we're gonna add layers. We're gonna give them variety. We're gonna give them diversity. And if you guys have been here for a second, you know one of the things that I always champion when it comes to representation of different races, especially black characters, is the diversification of representation, giving us variety of black representation. And that's what this show does. That's what this show does, in the form of characters like Eric, but also Jackson, Valerie, and Cal. Now, Cal is a new entry into this cast, and they are a very interesting character in terms of, you know, their gender identity. They don't identify as a female, even though they present as female, and so that's a very interesting storyline that is explored in this season, and that is, you know, unfairly, cruelly dismissed dismissed by the head teacher, who literally abuses her. Like, I hope there's a lawsuit coming, because the way that that head teacher treated Cal was like genuinely just unacceptable. But Cal develops this really cool friendship with Jackson, who is like automatically kind of enamored by them, and they hang out together. They allow themselves to just kind of relax and kind of alleviate some of the anxiousness that they feel to the rest of the world when they're together. But because of the kind of difficulties that Jackson is having in terms of, you know, only being in heterosexual relationships previously and not really being familiar with how to act in a queer relationship, he struggles to convert that interest that he has in Cal into a stable and healthy romantic relationship with them. I think it was fair to both characters. I like the fact that Cal kind of stood their ground and said, listen, like, I understand that you'd be open to learning, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, I'm not always open to teaching. I understand that. I understand that. I can relate. Okay, this idea of like, I'm open to learn, it's like, okay, cool, but I'm not always open to teach. So what now? Sometimes you just want to experience life and not feel like you're having to teach your partner everything. And I completely understood that when it came to the character of Cal, because they're still discovering things about themselves and, you know, what they want. And so to have to hold the hand of their partner as well would be a lot for them. And in terms of Jackson himself, if he was a planet, say, then he was definitely orbiting Cal. Like, he really wasn't doing much outside of orbiting Cal this season, as well as, of course, trying to advise Valerie, who was just like so far up Hope's bum, like literally. So Valerie, I understand the character of Valerie, okay? I don't hate Valerie. Okay, I understand my good sis, because she has the good grades, she's studious, she's committed to her education, she just wants to secure a bright future for herself, and I completely understand that. I completely understood it when she said, listen, like, this isn't just about me, this is about my family, this is about everyone. Like, 100%, that level of pressure will make you do things that even though you're not 100% agreeing with, you just want to get ahead. Like, I completely understand that about the character. But I was so happy that in the end she saw the light. Like, in the end she realized, hold up, I'm just being used here, because she was. Again, Hope deserves to be behind bars. So I was really happy when ultimately Valerie did kind of snap out of it and join the force, join the gang, join the revolution. And then at the very end there, we saw our girl Val, like, we're introduced to her boyfriend. Listen. Listen, that was intriguing. That was we finally got to see the boyfriend that was like flirting with her and sexting her all of these like medieval fantasies. We finally got to see him, and like, honestly, like, okay. Like, congrats sis, like, congrats is all I can say. So next up we have Aimee, and she's still experiencing the after effects of what happened to her in the previous season when she was sexually assaulted on the bus by some like creep, by some scum of the earth. Okay, like the fact that we have a character like Aimee who's just so full of sunshine and kindness and naivete, sure, but just such a lovely person. The fact that that light was dimmed by this horrible incident that happened to her is really heartbreaking, and I like the fact that this series doesn't shy away from just how long it would take for Aimee to get over this. Like, it's not just an instantaneous fix, it's something that will follow her for a very long time, and we see that in this season when she in fact seeks the help of Jean, and she starts having these therapy sessions with Jean, and then she's able to kind of verbalize how she was feeling as a result of what happened. And I feel like that was a really important thing for the character to go through in terms of, you know, coming to terms with the assault that she faced. And also we get to see, you know, outside of the therapy sessions, how it's affecting her relationship with her boyfriend Steve. And, you know, Steve is this like great guy, super cheerful, super supportive, but she can't be with him because her relationship with her body and her relationship with the idea of being in a relationship and just so much has changed. Okay, so we're also going to lump in the Groffs. Like I said, there there are so many really interesting unique characters in this series. Like we've barely even gone halfway, but we're gonna end off with the Groffs. In this season we did get to see, like I said, Adam Groff kind of pursuing this relationship with Eric, and it didn't turn out in the best way, but I do feel like the character learns a lot about himself and about what he can handle at this moment when it comes to a gay relationship. But also he goes on his own journey of self-discovery, realizing that whilst he may not be the best at academics, he does have a passion in terms of hanging out with Madam and like training her, and so he's able to go to this dog show where he's able to get some really great feedback for his very first performance. Would it be a performance? And then you have Michael Groff, who's the dad, and he actually returns Jean's book to her, the book that he made copies of last season. Yeah, he was scum. He was scum for like the first 2 seasons, but in this season I actually felt bad for him. I felt sympathetic towards him, and I understood that, you know, he wanted to rekindle things with his wife, but ultimately I do like the fact that Maureen told him her boundaries. She set boundaries for herself and said, listen, this isn't something that I want to pursue right now, it might confuse our son. Yeah, I feel like Maureen needs to be on her own for a second, because, you know, maybe jumping into another relationship after what happened with Michael wasn't the best idea, but maybe she doesn't even know how to be alone after so long of being married to him, so it's something that she needs to rediscover for herself. And then there was also this exploration of like generational trauma and this idea that Michael was treated so poorly by his father, was mocked and ridiculed and bullied by his father, into like repressing all of his emotions and always being strong and always upholding these archaic values of what it means to be a man. And that was something that was supported by his brother Peter, who turned out to be just as much of a bully as his father had been. There's this idea that he then instilled that same sort of rhetoric and ideology onto his son Adam, which led to him being a bully and then ultimately feeling so insecure in himself. So that kind of generational trauma and those kind of issues that are passed down from father to son time and time again in their family is really well explored in this season. Okay, so we finally have to close the doors on exploring the characters of this series, because like I said, there are so many there are so many great characters, but one thing that just really stands out to me when it comes to this show, it's its inclusivity. Like, it is truly one of the most inclusive series, and not only that, just in terms of inclusivity for aesthetic, as Hope tried to do with Valerie, okay, but it's also done very well. They do justice to these characters. They don't feel like token characters that are there to tick a box. They feel like characters that are complex, that are well-rounded. Even the characters that aren't as present in these storylines, say for example Ruby's father, as I mentioned, they go against the grain in terms of representing these characters. They're making them feel so much more authentic, and I feel like that's something that this series could really teach a bunch of other shows and a bunch of other movies that are trying to ride this wave of inclusivity and diversity by name only, and not actually doing justice to the movement by giving us representation with well-rounded and complex and interesting characters. And of course, what really helps bring these characters to life isn't just the fact that they represent people from all walks of life in the world, but also the fact that the actors do a great job portraying them, and the writers knock it out of the park in terms of giving them this really authentic, hilarious dialogue to work off of. Like, truly, the series is funny. I don't feel like I've emphasized that enough in this review, but it's hilarious. Like, it's truly hilarious. Mordell Secondary School just exists in its own universe, and honestly, I love it. I wish I was living there myself. But with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Sex Education Season 3 a 10 out of 10. It's just excellent. Like, I can't think of a negative thing to say, truly. So yeah, it's getting a 10 from me. But that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Sex Education Season 3, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!